A lone vertibird flies over Lake Champlain in northern Vermont at treetop level. Inside is the first squad of the 2nd Minutemen Scouts. Pilots from the 8th Air Lance have trained for 6 months for this nighttime mission. They successfully navigate the lake and land 5 miles south of Burlington, Vermont. The Scouts set up a radio beacon to lead in the rest of the 8th Air Lance and drop the 6th and 9th Minutemen companies far behind enemy lines. To her horror, the technician finds that the radio beacon is not working. One of the vacuum tubes inside the beacon has broken during the long flight. She manages to get the beacon working using spare parts and narrowly avoids disaster. This will be the first of several errors, mistakes, and bad luck that will haunt this operation. This is the beginning of Operation Shining Beacon, and the start of the Commonwealth's 10-year-long conflict in the New Hampshire region. By late 2294, the Commonwealth's intention of invading New Hampshire is an open secret. Merchants, farmers, and even the raiders in New Hampshire know that many factions in the Commonwealth are calling for an end to the raider menace from the north. The regional leaders of the GMM, the Green Mountain Militia, meet in early November to discuss what to do about this threat. Stories of how the Minutemen crushed the trappers and children of Atom on Far Harbor are well known in New Hampshire. Also well known are the stories of how land speculators sold off most of the land on Far Harbor to colonists. The GMM leaders worry that the Commonwealth will sweep in and take everything that they have. Joshua Chase of the Manchester Militia suggests collaborating with the Minutemen in fighting the raiders. Leonard Webster of the Concord Crusaders and Matt Vandenberg of the Vermont Guard disagree. Elijah Allen of the Rutland Militia stays silent. Vandenberg's opinion is that the Commonwealth is a greater threat to their freedom than all the raiders combined. Instead, he proposes striking the Minuteman staging bases in the Northern Commonwealth. Minuteman security has been extremely lax and caravanners and merchants know exactly where the bases are. Vandenberg suggests that hitting the Minutemen early will deter them from even entering New Hampshire. Both Vandenberg and Webster vote for the attack. Chase opposes it. After some consideration, Allen votes against the plan and the attack does not proceed. The Minutemen have just narrowly avoided a devastating attack. Leonard Webster proposes electing an overall commander for the GMM. All the leaders agree that this would be important, but all of them propose themselves as leader and none are willing to support others for the role of commander. None of the militias are willing to put themselves under the command of another leader, preferring instead to have autonomy. Instead, the regional militias will begin gathering weapons and ammunition during the winter, building tunnels and bunkers in and around their areas to prepare for whatever may come. What the other leaders of the GMM do not know, is that Joshua Chase has already made a deal to bring New Hampshire into the Commonwealth. This will later fuel a long-running fratricidal civil war in the region. Elsewhere in New Hampshire, even the raiders know that the Minutemen are coming. Leaving New Hampshire is not an option for them. The GMM stalks the countryside waiting to ambush unwary raiders. To the north lay the religious kingdoms of the Quebecois, and to the west, the fierce Ronto pirates of Lake Ontario fight the Finger Lakes Alliance for control of the waterways. With no good options open to them, the raiders begin digging into their city fortresses and hoping that they can repel the Minutemen when they arrive. The air campaign is the first phase of the operation to secure New Hampshire territory. Colonel Hollis, in overall command of the operation, has designated the 6th and 9th companies to take and hold Burlington, Vermont for the Commonwealth. The 9th is an experienced army unit raised after the Gunner War. They have served faithfully, though without distinction, in the last few conflicts. The 6th, however, is a reserve unit and has not seen action since the Gun War in 2288. Many of the younger troopers in the 6th have never seen combat. Colonel Hollis would have preferred to assign the veteran 1st and 4th companies for this mission. But Colonel Garvey, in an unexpected move, has taken both companies to the Southern Commonwealth to guard against what he said would be a possible supermutant invasion. President Hancock considered having Garvey arrested for insubordination, but a court-martial at this point would be an unwelcome distraction for the general populace, especially given the unpopularity of this war. After the war he would have Garvey quietly retired. So, Colonel Hollis will have to make do without the 1st or 4th Minutemen. The 8th Air Lance begins shuttling troops to northern Vermont, relying on the radio beacon to guide them in the dark moonless night. With only 4 vertibirds available, it will take 3 days to land both companies and their necessary supplies. No air cover or air reconnaissance will be possible till that task is completed. Near Manchester, New Hampshire, there is confusion and gunfire. Flanked by a squad of Minutemen scouts, Joshua Chase announced that he was declaring the region for the Commonwealth the previous night. He had not consulted with anyone in his militia about this decision, and many are upset by this. The scouts must defend Chase from angry militia members. Gunfire breaks out. Some militia members go cross-country to tell the other factions about this betrayal, others go south to block the Minutemen from entering New Hampshire. What was supposed to be an easy one-day march to Manchester has become a running ambush for the Minutemen. The 6th Field Artillery must mobilize early to provide fire support to drive off the rebel militiamen. Eventually the scouts regain control of the situation at Chase's headquarters. About half the militia has deserted to oppose the Minuteman invasion. The reduced number of militiamen loyal to Chase now become the 15th Minutemen Company. Meanwhile, the situation on the coast is somewhat better. Task Force 3 left the Salem Naval Yard at midnight. 33 fishing boats, tugs, and barges carry the 3 units north towards Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Minuteman scouts swim to the beaches and silently eliminate raider sentries watching the coast. Landing at Rye Harbor Park, the 1st Marines are practically inside the city before the raiders realize what is happening. Once the 1st Armored lands, the raiders flee the city headed for Portland, Maine. Meanwhile, the 14th Minutemen, coming from Far Harbor, begin their march on Brunswick, Maine. The 14th lays waste to any resistance that they meet along the way. The aim of the coastal drive is not just to connect Far Harbor to the Commonwealth, but to annihilate the raiders once and for all. In their haste to clear all resistance, the 14th displaces several local farmers and fishermen that have nothing to do with the raiders. This decision will come back to haunt them. To the northwest, the 8th Air Lance has been shuttling in troops all night, using the radio beacon for navigation and the cover of night to quietly slip in. Already the 1st platoon of the 9th has landed and set up a perimeter with the help of the scouts. But as the sun rises, raiders and militiamen easily spot the vertibirds in the sky and begin shooting at them as they pass. Vertibird propellers are notoriously flimsy, and pilots have been told to avoid ground fire and continue the operation. More and more raiders are being drawn to landing zone or LZ Sierra, and opening fire. The 1st of the 9th and the scouts barely hold the perimeter. Around 11 a.m., a wave of vertibirds finishes dropping the 2nd platoon and returns south to pick up the first half of the 3rd platoon. The next wave of vertibirds finds heavier ground fire all around the LZ. They are forced to do touch-and-go landings to avoid the intense fire all around the area. The last flight of the day barely delivers the last of the 9th Minutemen as the sun sets. They head home for the evening. The pilots are exhausted and need rest before resuming the flights the next day. At LZ Sierra, Captain Jane Nixon, commander of the 9th, radios the Commonwealth and requests more ammunition and supplies. The Minutemen have been using ammunition at much higher rate than anticipated and are running out of supplies. The next day the 8th Air Lance will have to postpone delivering troops to instead deliver the needed supplies to the troops already on the ground. The delays will double the time necessary to secure Burlington. It will also keep the Minutemen aerial assets from supporting the other parts of the plan. Just west of Burlington, Matt Vandenberg monitors the situation. He has decided to let the raiders and Minutemen grind each other down before launching an attack. On the southern front, Minutemen artillery has driven off the rebel militia and the 2nd Minuteman Company has reached the outskirts of Nashua, New Hampshire. The raiders have blockaded the roads with scrap and fight from inside ruined buildings. Artillery strikes keep the raiders pinned, but this is not the level of resistance that Colonel Hollis had expected from the raiders. Meanwhile, defectors from Chase's militia have reached the Concord area and informed Leonard Webster about Chase's betrayal. At about the same time, reports start coming in from the coast. Minutemen have landed at Portsmouth and are driving down from Maine. Webster realizes that a full-scale invasion is underway. More furious than stunned, he sends runners to the other militia leaders asking for help. He then mobilizes his entire militia to fight the Minutemen. Hollis meets Chase in Nashua and welcomes him and what is left of his militia into the Commonwealth military. Chase is commissioned as a captain. His men are given uniforms to wear but refuse to wear anything but the hats. The militiamen are noticeably uncomfortable next to the Minutemen. Scouts reach the outskirts of Manchester and report all the roads in are blockaded with raiders guarding the approaches. Colonel Hollis orders the 6th Field Artillery to move up to Nashua and radios back to Boston to accelerate the supply schedules. The resistance that the expedition is encountering is significantly stronger than what they had anticipated, and supplies are running low. Back at the castle, Major Edmund Finney of the 9th Logistics Company is caught unprepared by this urgent request. Ammunition and other supplies for the expedition were supposed to be provided directly from the Lexum factory in Lexington. But those supplies would not be ready for a couple of weeks. All that Finney has available are the strategic reserves meant for the defense of the Commonwealth, and not to be used for any other purpose. Left with no choice, Finney orders the supplies to be withdrawn from the stockpile, reasoning that he could place an order to replenish them later. Finney personally leads an emergency supply column north to replenish the supplies for the army. 2 days later at a crossroads, while arguing with Brahmin drivers, Captain Finney is shot by a militia sniper. Nobody knows that the purchase order to replace the ammunition reserves has not been placed. This will have dire consequences later on. Meanwhile in the Western Commonwealth, the 11th Minuteman Company begins marching north on schedule. The 11th is a reserve unit and have no field radios. They do not know how delayed the entire invasion is. Nor do they know that the 3rd Minuteman will not be relieving them soon. As they march north, they're continually harassed by snipers from the Rutland militia. They eventually make it into Rutland and oust a squad of raiders from the town. Militiamen surround the town. The 11th is now trapped in Rutland with no way to communicate. After 4 days of preparation, the siege of Manchester begins. The 6th Field Artillery begins shelling the city for a week. Once the bombardment ends, Hollis will launch a frontal attack with the 2nd and use the 3rd and 13th to envelop the city. Once Manchester is taken, he will repeat the process on Concord using the 3rd as the hammer and the other units to envelop the city. Scouts from the 3rd platoon inform him that increasing numbers of militiamen are appearing in the woods on their right flank. He disregards this as he is firmly focused on the front lines. After a week of shelling, the Southern forces ready to launch their attack the next morning. At dawn the next day, hundreds of militiamen burst out of the woods attacking the 3rd on the right flank. The veteran 3rd, an experienced unit, holds its position. The attack on Manchester is cancelled as the entire Southern force must fend off this attack. Meanwhile, the coastal drive to connect Far Harbor to the rest of the Commonwealth is going well. The raiders have been methodically pushed into a pocket around Portland, Maine. The 1st Armored Minutemen will lead the assault to crush this final impediment to connecting Far Harbor to the Commonwealth. In Rutland, the 11th Minutemen have been surrounded and cut off for 3 days. They are slowly running out of ammunition. No one in the Commonwealth realizes this. But, by sheer luck, a Minuteman vertibird strays east off its course and sees fighting around Rutland. This news is relayed to the castle and then to Colonel Hollis. The Northern force is busy trying to force the raiders out of Burlington. With the militiamen attacking, Hollis cannot send the 3rd Minuteman to relieve the 11th. All he can do is spare one platoon from the 13th Minutemen to try and break through to the surrounded troops. The commander of the 13th, Lieutenant John Pears, takes one platoon and force marches his way west. The Rutland militia detects this force of Minutemen headed west. Elijah Allen leaves a small force surrounding Rutland and takes most of his forces to intercept the relief column. The platoon makes it as far as Keene, New Hampshire, where they are surrounded. For 3 days the platoon fights off repeated attacks of up to 200 militiamen. Vertibirds use the pause in the fighting around Rutland to airdrop supplies to the 11th. Over the course of the fight, most of the platoon is killed, including Lieutenant Pears. The last 5 Minutemen exhaust their ammunition and decide to make a final bayonet charge at the militiamen. Elijah Allen, impressed by their bravery, asks for a ceasefire. He allows the survivors to return to Manchester with the body of Lieutenant Pears. Although they failed to lift the siege at Rutland, the platoon relieved the pressure on the 11th, long enough for them to get resupplied by vertibirds. This single engagement would change the reputation of the 13th Minuteman Company. From being a punishment unit to being one of the toughest units in the Minutemen. Back in Manchester, Leonard Webster's frontal assault on the Minutemen has failed horribly. He had unknowingly chosen to attack the most battle-hardened unit in the entire Minuteman military. The Knights are a well-disciplined and experienced unit and refuse to bend under the militiaman onslaught. They hold their position while the 2nd flanks the militiamen and crushes them. The remainder of Webster's militia scatters into the woods, unable to stop the Minutemen. Up in Burlington, Matt Vandenberg has figured out this lesson by observing his enemy. Freed from hauling supplies and troops, the vertibirds of the 8th Air Lance are free to strafe the raiders in Burlington as the 6th and 9th smash into the city, massacring any raiders left behind. Vandenberg has no wish to suffer the same fate as the Concord Crusaders. He will not seek open battle with the Minutemen, but instead will try to wear them down over time. The Vermont Guard fades into the forests and waits for its opportunity. With the militia brushed aside, the Southern force turns its attention back to Manchester. However, the raiders chose to flee to Concord as the Minutemen dealt with the militia. The Southern force enters Manchester to reorganize and to prepare the attack on Concord. The 3rd will depart early and head west to relieve the 11th in Rutland. Meanwhile, Hollis has the 1st Armored Minutemen moved from the coast to join the main assault on Concord. The raiders in Concord know that this is their last stand. They cannot risk going out into the countryside where the militiamen might hunt them down. They dig deep into the ruins of Concord and wait for the battle to start. The raiders are about to receive a lesson in combined arms tactics. Minuteman scouts direct artillery or vertibirds to hit raider defenses. The Minuteman artillery barrage pummels gaps into the defenses while vertibirds suppress the defenders. Just as in the Quincy and Dalton Farm battles, the 1st Armored Infantry leads the assault, followed by the 2nd and 13th Minutemen. It's a masterpiece of tactics, and shows just how far the Minutemen have come from their humble origins. The attack is a rout, as the raiders cannot mount an effective defense. Within 3 days the last pockets of resistance are extinguished. By the beginning of April, the Minuteman flag flies over Concord. Representatives from President Hancock arrive and meet with Joshua Chase. The territory of New Hampshire is proclaimed. Chase will be named provisional governor. The cities of Nashua, Manchester, Portsmouth, Portland, and Concord will become settlements once settlers from the Commonwealth arrive. The 3rd Minuteman Company makes slow but steady progress towards Rutland. Captain James Sullivan, the commander of the 3rd, is a stern disciplinarian and does not abide the guerrilla tactics of the militiamen. He hangs 2 captured militiamen as a warning to the rest. For the moment, the attacks cease. To the farmers and villagers of New Hampshire, the Minuteman invasion is a huge unwelcome shock. They resent the level of violence that has come into their land. In addition, 2 overzealous Commonwealth tax collectors arrive in the Nashua area and tell farmers that they will have to pay taxes immediately or lose their farms. The order is quickly rescinded, but the message is already out. The Commonwealth is here to steal your land. popular opinion in New Hampshire turns against the Commonwealth. By mid-April, the 3rd relieves the 11th and prepares to make the drive to Burlington. The 2nd and the 13th approach Montpelier. Anxious to avoid the same type of massacre as at Concord, the raider chief at Montpelier surrenders. 120 raiders are marched south into captivity. In a matter of weeks, some of these will be back in New Hampshire as new members of the 13th Minutemen. On May 3, Colonel Hollis proclaims Operation Shining Beacon completed. Hollis will leave the 13th, 14th, and 15th companies in the new territory. The rest of the army prepares to return to the Commonwealth. However, 2 days later at a Commonwealth base, a bomb explodes at a barracks killing 44 Minutemen. It is the largest loss of life in the entire campaign. All plans to leave New Hampshire are immediately cancelled. The war in the north has entered a newer and deadlier phase for the Minutemen. In the next episode we will see the war slowly begin to grind down the Minuteman forces in New Hampshire, as they fight an enemy that strikes suddenly and fades away quickly.